Well, hello and welcome to another episode of STILLWOOD on Location, or should I say STILLWOOD off location. I confess we are not on STILLWOOD property anymore. Again, I have left the premises. Now I am on the trail on the way to Teapot Hike. Teapot Hike is a relatively popular hike that the trailhead that everyone knows about is right down next to Cultus Lake. You pass it whenever you drive up to STILLWOOD or drive around the lake. But off Cultus Lake or off Teapot Trail, there's a number of offshoot trails. And if you kind of weave your way and find your way through those things, you actually get to STILLWOOD property. You connect to one of the trails that's around STILLWOOD Camp. And so this is on the way to connect to the Teapot Trail. And what you see behind me is a creek. It's not the same creek that I've shown in the other videos. This is a different creek. It is not Watt Creek. And there are two really things that have kind of amazed me about this particular location in this particular area every time I walk through here. Now, you'll have to imagine with me a little bit and try and put yourselves in my shoes. So the first thing is that there's water here. Wow, it's a creek, fantastic, that's amazing. What's amazing about that is that there normally isn't water going through this creek bed. Every time I've gone across this trail and through this trail, you cross this area and there's no water. And so this year there's water. So that's something that kind of amazes me. There's no water, let alone there's actually a significant volume of water here now. To be honest, I'm not entirely sure if it's just a time of year, although I do think that I have gone on this trail around this time of year and there haven't been any. It may also be because of the large amount of off-flow from this last summer that was larger than normal. So maybe the creek's beds have changed, maybe they've been altered and there's now going to be water coming through here permanently. Maybe this is going to dry up in a month or two. I don't know, I'll have to come back and check it out. The other thing that amazes me about this is, and I've kind of already mentioned it, the fact that in the past there has been no water that comes through here. That's relatively normal to have a creek bed that's dried up when it's the drier season, but usually it's dry even pretty early on in the season during spring. And the other amazing thing about this is that this area is always been, ever since I've known it, very, very wide. And you'll see below me and around me that it's very rocky and gravelly with the occasional tree coming up. So when I come through here in the past, when you start and immediately it gets rocky and gravelly, very different from the rest of the forest, dirt, undergrowth, things like that, it stops. It's like a line. It's dirt, it goes from dirt and grass to gravel and rocks, and it goes that way for about 50 to 60 feet with no water. 50 to 60 feet, just gravel and rock, and then there's another line, and you get back to grass and lush and dirt and things like that. So that's always kind of amazed me whenever I come through this area, how neat and cool it is. Obviously, I've known that at some point water has come through here, whether it's annually or every few years when there's a big melt or something like that. Nevertheless, this area sees a lot of change. Maybe it sees change once every year, like I mentioned, every few years, but this area experiences a lot of change. And when I think of change, I think of, surprise, surprise, I think of God every once in a while. Now, people say that God never changes. And some people don't quite jive with that. They don't quite understand that. And this is a whole huge theological conversation that I cannot even scratch the surface of whether God changes, his actions change, can we influence that change through prayer, all those sorts of things. I can't touch that. But I do know this, that even if God's actions change, his character never does. Who God is remains constant. It never varies, it never changes. His character is always the same. One of the facets of his character, and there are many facets of his character, is that God is good. Now, when I say that God is good, I don't mean that God has the characteristic of being good. What I mean when I say that is that God is good. God is goodness. God is the defining factor of what good is. And so then by that very definition, everything that he does must therefore be good. Now, again, some of us, it might not jive with that. How can God be good and yet I experience all this hurt, all this pain, all this anxiety? How can God be good when this happens? How can God be good when that happens? And again, this is a huge theological conversation that I cannot scratch the surface of, about the introduction of evil and bad things and heartbreak and brokenness into our world. I can't touch that. But I do know that God is good. And so what I encourage you guys to do for this next week or this next day, whatever you have the time for, is to just think heavily on what that means. What does it mean for God to be good? And not only that, but how does that impact the way that we live? What parts of our lives will change in the actions that we take and the things that we pursue, knowing that God is the definition of goodness and that God is goodness? I think you'll have a lot of fun things to think about when you do that. In the meantime, stay safe, stay healthy, and I look forward to talking to you again and one day seeing you all again. Bye.